Welcome, everyone. Give a moment for folks to join. Awesome. I see the number of attendees increasing. So as that happens, I'm going to jump right into our welcome and our accommodations and housekeeping notes. Thank you, everyone, for joining day 2 of our IL Philosophy and Practice Summit. We're grateful if you're coming back from yesterday, day 1, or if this is your first session that you're joining. My name is Mary Kate Wells. I use the pronouns she, her. For visual description, I am a white 30-year-old woman with red shortish hair, wearing a blue top in my home office. Today's presentation is part of the ILNet, which is operated by IRLU in collaboration with Nickel, April, and University of Montana. So if you can go to slide 2, we're going to take a few moments for some housekeeping and accommodation items for any folks that are newly joining us. We will have captioning available today in real time. You can access captions by clicking Show Captions in your Zoom menu, or through the stream text link, external link in the chat that we will put there momentarily. Interpreters will be providing American Sign Language throughout the summit. They should always be visible, and please let us know in the chat if you are unable to see the interpreters at any time. Interpreters will also be providing Spanish language interpretation on the Spanish channel, which you can find in your Zoom bar, and when you click interpretation and select the language that you would like to hear the summit in. Next slide. Due to some ongoing Zoom updates, we also do recommend that people join from a desktop computer or laptop so they can access full accessibility features, which is not always available on a mobile device. Today's presentation will be on the ILRU on-demand training page by September 23rd. So you'll have access to the recording, transcript, and material. We also ask that you complete a short evaluation after both sessions today. Next slide. Awesome. And so this is the important stuff, how you can participate today in the summit. We are offering a number of ways to engage with our presenters. We prioritize accessibility as a core value. As a cross-disability movement, we also recognize that individuals have diverse and sometimes competing access needs. Access needs are supports or accommodations that a person might need to communicate, learn, and participate fully in activity. So today, we're going to be using the polling platform that we used yesterday, but we will be offering multiple options on how to participate. So the chat box will, you will have access to chat the host and panelist at all times through the summit. When the chat is set to host and panelists, the presenters and the folks behind the webinar, all the coordination, will be able to see your posts. So if a presenter referenced something that's in the chat and you can't see it, it just might be because that it was sent to host and panelists only. We are going to be turning on public chat at specific times during the session. We will announce at each session when the chat will be turned on and give a warning to folks so they can adjust their Zoom notifications as needed for individual accessibility. We will also share verbally what has been shared in the chat. As a note, we will not tolerate any discriminatory, offensive, or attacking behavior in the chat, but we welcome different viewpoints and perspectives that might be challenging some of our existing perspectives. In the chat, we will also be providing continued learning links, and that will also be available on a Word document on the training page. For the Q&A box, you can submit questions throughout the summit by clicking Q&A in your Zoom menu and enter your question. We aim to have as much engagement as possible as we're in webinar format. However, we're not going to get to all of our questions during the presentation, so we're using what we call parking lot system. So the parking lot allows us to acknowledge the importance of the question or comment, but understanding that we might not be able to address it in this specific session. We welcome folks to stay after session 4, starting at 5:15 Eastern for a social hour to discuss some of these questions and engage in some conversation with your peers. We had over 60 people stay yesterday after session 2, so it was a really great conversation we had. During the call to action pieces, we invite attendees to raise their hand with a question, and at that time we will invite you to unmute and ask that you keep your question to 30 seconds. And finally, once we get to, we're going to be doing 2 polls during session 3. We're in session 3, and the instructions for that are to follow. Okay, so next slide. All right, so we are at day 2 of the IL Summit. This is going to be session 3. The session will be 90 minutes. It will be a combination of information giving and call to actions. The goal for this workshop session is to meaningful application and implementation of IL philosophy in SIL and SILC's organizational structures, policy, and culture. Next slide. All right. As always, we value your feedback, and we'll put links in the chat at the end of each session, as well as on the screen in the material. So please give us your feedback, what worked, what didn't, or what you want to hear more about. Next slide. All right, so session 3 presenters. I'm gonna kick it off to our 2 presenters for session 3. Latricia Seye, the Vice President of Independent Living at Access Living in Chicago, and Amber Smock, Vice President of Advocacy at Access Living in Chicago. So with that, I'll hand it off to you all. Thank you.
Okay. Great. Hello, everyone. This is Amber Smock speaking. I am the Vice President of Advocacy for Access Living, and my pronouns are she and hers. I'm going to do just a little bit more introduction, and then my colleague Trish will also introduce herself. But for a visual description, I am a white woman with short blondish brown hair and a black and white top, sitting in my office at Access Living. So that's me. Trish, if you would like to take a second to introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Trish Seye. I am the Vice President of Independent Living for Access Living. I go by pronouns she, her. I am a Black woman with a blue dress on, and I'm also at Access Living today. So my background is my office here at Access Living.
Okay, thank you. This is Amber speaking. Could we flip the slide to the next one, please? So actually go back one. Yes, okay. So I think there's a slide that might be missing, but I just want to remind everyone that the title for this particular presentation is about applying independent living philosophy through your organization's structure, policies, and culture. And Trish and I are very excited about doing this presentation with all of you today. Access Living has been around a long time. There's been a lot of lessons learned over the years, and we're looking forward to a good conversation. So yeah, let's go ahead to the next slide. So what I'd like to offer first is just to understand what we're going to be doing today. And so there are four main things that we're going to do during this 90-minute session. The first is just a very quick overview of Access Living at the Center for Independent Living for Chicago. The second is we are going to be talking about independent living philosophy, application example from Access Living's own policies and practice. Third, we are going to have some discussions on meaningful application of the independent living philosophy within organizational structures, policy, and culture for both SILs and SILCs. And then the last thing is that we want to engage you all, right? So we want to have some engagement. We want to have some discussion on next steps for how to apply or advance innovation and independent living philosophy as applied to your SIL and your SILC, how they work. So those are the four main details of the presentation. Thank you. Okay, next slide, please. So I'm going to start with just a quick overview of Access Living. So Access Living was established in 1980, and we are the Center for Independent Living for the city of Chicago. We, just like many of you, provide independent living 5 core services. So we do peer support, we do advocacy, we do independent living skills development, we do transition, and we do information referral. So we do all 5 of those things, just like every Center for Independent Living does. But we also have some additional services or initiatives that we conduct. One is that we have a civil rights legal team. So we are a Center for Independent Living that also happens to have 3 attorneys and what we call a fair housing testing coordinator on our staff. So this helps back us up when we are addressing barriers for people with disabilities. Second, we have what's called a Disability Inclusion Institute. And the Disability Inclusion Institute is a training consulting initiative that we have. So we train nonprofits, we train corporations on disability inclusion. We have a rather expansive advocacy team. And so many centers for independent living may have one person designated as an advocacy coordinator, or maybe there's somebody who has a main job, but is also doubling as the advocacy point person. At Access Living, we actually have a team of about 14 people that are involved in our advocacy team. So about half of them do policy and half of them do community organizing. And the fourth item that's a little different about what Access Living does is we offer digital accessibility consulting. So we provide consulting services to entities that need their websites evaluated or improved for accessibility. But I want to emphasize that even though Access Living has a wide range of programs that we run, the examples that Trish and I are going to share today are really applicable for all centers for independent living, regardless of size. So this is just very important to keep in mind that we try to select examples that could apply no matter how big or small your organization is. Next slide, please. Okay. This
one of the
over Trish. Sorry, excuse me. Just handing it over.
Thanks, Amber. So one of our independent philosophies, and as it relates to our organizational structure, especially at Access Living, is our commitment to hiring and retaining and promoting staff with disabilities within Access Living. And I just wanted to discuss some of the benefits as it relates specifically for our staff and the culture of the organization. One of the things that it does, it promotes increased independence and economic self-sufficiency for our staff, creates additional opportunities for learning and development. And so we do have a lot of training courses that we offer within the organization, and also offer those training courses outside of the organization, which is really important to our staff's development, professional development, and just an understanding of being able to live independently as well. It creates opportunities for connection and expansion of friendships, not only within the organization, just within our engagement throughout the city of Chicago. And it promotes personal well-being, and the mental health benefits they continue to build as we continue to make that an important part of our hiring within the organization. And from an economic standpoint, it helps to save and build assets and resources. The other part of it is it fosters internal collaboration. We foster internal collaboration across the organization. An important and significant benefit to being a part of a SIL or SILC are the programs that are available within our community for people with disabilities, which is very different from many other organizations that may offer similar type of programs, but we look at kind of the holistic approach of this. So fostering internal and collaboration, whether within a particular department, I can speak specifically to independent living, with the wraparound direct services that we have, or even across other additional departments that Amber mentioned within the organization. It creates an unmatched, holistic approach to living independently that one would be pretty hard pressed to duplicate in any other organization. And the other part of this is that one thing that Access Living has done is created additional committees to foster an increased culture of inclusiveness. And that includes, we started a racial equity committee a couple of years ago. I'm a part of that committee. And so some of the racial equity work that has taken place, which in 2020, we hired a racial equity consultant. She conducted 30 hours of focus groups within the organization, interviewed our staff and consumers to understand the experiences of people of color within the organization and how it intersects also with people with disabilities. The senior leadership completed 12 hours of racial equity training and did also our own reading and discussion on anti-racism and race equity. And then it moved over to our staff, which also did 12 hours of racial equity training. Then we hired a director of equity and strategy at the end of last year, and she has been such a great addition to our senior leadership team, which we'll talk about later on in terms of some of the things and initiatives she's brought to the organization just in the short time that she's been here. And then also we have the compensation committee, which I'm also a part of, and it's made up of 8 staff members across the organization. As I said, I'm on the committee, and Amber will speak a little bit later on the wage and salary structure later in the presentation. But one thing to note that I'm extremely proud of is that each year we do go back and forth in terms of whether this will be a year that a bonus is extended. And during those times when a bonus is extended, the wage and salary committee, we meet to determine how that will be distributed throughout the organization. And so this year, the wage and salary committee, as well as last year, our lower earning staff received a base level bonus first. And then the remaining amount of the bonus pool, after distributing those base levels, were distributed out equally amongst the staff. And so from an equity standpoint, to be able to say, here's this base amount that's provided to those that are earning lower than maybe some of the senior leadership, some of the managers, they're getting a base amount, and then the rest will be distributed across in addition to those that receive that base amount. And so these are some of the things that we think about as we are developing this structure within our organization. And then just to talk a little bit more, I was talking about our director of equity and strategy, but as we look at the all staff cultural learning spaces with a disability lens, just in the time that we've had Carol, who is our director, We have the Cultural Heritage Month. We have Disability Pride Month, Hispanic Heritage Month, the Women's Equality Day that we've had, Black History Month, the Pride, as well as Juneteenth, which we actually get a day off for that within Access Living. We have the Arab American Heritage Month, and also have presenters that come to speak from a disability lens. Each of those particular months, we speak about not only that month as it relates to, let's say, for Black history, but the way in which it intersects for people with disabilities as well. We've also had some in-person visits to the Illinois Holocaust Museum, Deuce Table Museum of African American History. And one fun event that we were able to have was our dumpling making for the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. So these are just some examples of some of our commitment to being intentional with our race equity in terms of also the cultural things that we want to make very important within our organization. And so next slide, please. So we also want to, and this was a favorite part of mine in terms of having opportunities and providing opportunities to our staff for advancement into leadership roles. I will say, and I always make it a point to say that I am where I am because of having mentors and because of working for someone years ago that made sure I was able to attend the right amount of trainings to get the professional development that I needed, even when I didn't think that it was something for me in terms of my future. And so that is something that is very important here at Access Living as well. Opportunities for staff advancement for our managers, supervisors, our senior positions, as well as specialists. One of the things that I do, although I am over a team of almost 40 now, every 6 months I meet with the independent living staff one-on-one. I discuss some of the barriers that they may be experiencing, but I also talk about resources that will be available as it relates to their growth, their individual growth, professional development. What are some of the goals that they have? Also, it speaks to using interim management time to grow skills within our current staff. So as those that transition out of management opportunities, as we're looking to see who within the organization could use additional professional development training so that we can always look at promoting within. I think that is so important to be able to promote within. It not only creates a culture that the staff know that there is an opportunity for them to grow, but it also rewards those hardworking within the organization. And finally, the team approach to the disability lived experience and insight for reasonable accommodations. I think it's so important that when you have staff who have disabilities, the lived experience to be able to speak through reasonable accommodations, take in those requests, be able to speak with your manager or supervisor on the reasonable accommodations that will be needed in order for you to be able to do your job effectively. But when you go to the original point of hiring those with disabilities within the organization, that is how you make it a comfortable conversation to be able to talk about the reasonable accommodations that will be needed. Next slide, please. And so we're going to our first call to action, and this is kind of an open discussion where you can put something in the chat or in terms of Q&A. And so based upon what you've heard thus far in our practices that we have at Access Living, what are some of the things that come to mind in terms of things for you individually within your SIL or SILC that you could do better to implement some of these things that we've already discussed? And if there are barriers, can you speak to those barriers? What comes to mind in terms of why it would be difficult possibly to implement some of the things that we've discussed thus far? And Amber, you want me to read some of the ones that we're saying?
Oh, sorry, excuse me. Why don't you go ahead and do some of that? Right now it's kind of coming through a bit slow, so I think
Okay.
you can keep up. But I know that the other day it was like boom, boom, boom. But yeah, let's why don't you go ahead and read some of the examples?
So we have more training policy changes. I see our SILC could grow service availability. Funding to hire consultants and trainers, which does come up a lot in terms of some of the barriers that we see different SILC experience. Policy changes and openness to change. Funding. Equity of pay and individual sharing of resources, which we're going to get to later as well in terms of equity of pay. Inclusive cultural events. Healthcare worker shortages. Developing strategies that are clear and transparent about steps for advancement for staff, how to advance in leadership in the organization, which is really important.
Hey Trish, can I make a comment? You know,
Sure.
just like as we're monitoring this, what I'm noticing is, first of all, I want to call everybody's attention to the fact that Trish has been presenting specifically on organization structure. And one of the very important things that I think about really focusing on that is that one of the best ways for retaining staff, some folks have been talking about retaining staff, but one of the best ways is making it feel like there's a future at your organization. And so that is a lot of what, you know, Trish brought up these examples, like how do we make sure that these work environments that we're in, which are supposed to be majority people with disabilities, that they really offer a future for our staff and that staff really feel like they have a say. And, you know, honestly, I sometimes think that showing and doing work in those areas can actually help you look more attractive to funders, which is another common thread that people are talking about. So this is not exactly about programming. It's more about how do we make sure that in our workplace, we are practicing independent living philosophy with our peers and making it a really good place to work. You know, and I think that's what we're calling you all to really like focus on. I mean, Trish, do you feel like that sounds about right? Because
Absolutely.
I think folks are thinking about problems, and I'm like, there's lots of problems. Don't get me wrong. I know there's problems. But this very specific thing of having a good independent living workplace, I feel like this is what you're speaking to.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think the importance of making your staff feel comfortable in terms of having some of the conversations, being able to talk about, I will say this all the time when I do meet with staff one-on-one, and I say, just know that I won't be offended if you talk to me about what you want to do in terms of your goals, even whether it's within our organization or even if it's outside of this organization. I believe in growth. And I think, you know, I will just say I've seen tears in terms of speaking with some of the staff, because I think that some have never experienced hearing that from a leader, to say it's okay to talk about, I want to grow even outside, excuse me, even outside of this role that I'm in. And so leaving it to where your staff feel comfortable in having those conversations with you, I think is really important. And also, I think it's a benefit to you as a leader, if you are a leader in an organization, because when the time comes to fill positions, I can't tell you how many times I can recollect those one-on-one conversations where I can say, oh, I remember this person talked to me about being interested in this position, or this person was saying they're ready to move to this senior position. And so it makes for an easier transition in filling different roles within the organization.
Yeah. Yeah. And Trish, another thing that is coming through, this is Amber speaking. Another thing that's coming through the chat is some folks are saying, well, but we only have like 6 people, or we only have a tiny group of folks. And, you know, I appreciate that at the same time, I also think that what we're offering here is that everybody in the organization has something to say about the workplace that they're in. And, if you're a frontline staff person, you have stuff to say about what makes this a good workplace for me. If you are a manager, you do have the responsibility and the obligation to really take some time to think, how can I grow my staff to be the best that they can be? And how can I invest in them and support them? And how do I, rather than just saying no to everything, uh, open the door to say, well, let's problem solve that together. And one of the things that really keeps people wanting to work in a workplace is feeling like they're going to be heard and that their ideas are taken seriously. But management has to set the tone for that, right? So it doesn't really matter how big or small. Just know that internal collaboration can really matter. And yes, there can be a boundary between management and frontline staff, but collaboration will only help your organization get stronger, to be honest. I don't know what you think of that, Trish, as far as the size problem.
Yeah, I do. I agree with you, Amber. I also think that being upfront and being honest, there have been different times where I've had to have difficult conversations based upon maybe funding opportunities that are available or funding opportunities that aren't available. And being able to talk about, here's where we are right now. Here's what I would like to happen down the road. However, we are in this particular space. But the goal is for, as you're continuing to develop professionally, we will be looking for, if this is available, additional funding opportunities to possibly move you into this in the future. I always believe in having open dialogue and being as honest as possible as it relates to someone's tenure within an organization. And what I've found is staff will appreciate you being as upfront and honest for whether a big or small organization. I think it's just beneficial.
Yeah, yeah. This is Amber, and I think that I absolutely agree. I think the other thing I just want to point out about internal collaboration on organizational structure issues is that getting up close and personal with your colleagues is one of the most important ways to get past bias. And, we all have, various biases that we have to deal with. But, whether it might be racial bias or disability bias or another kind of bias, nothing helps people work through that better than having something to work on together. So honestly, like this kind of project, these kind of conversations can be extremely helpful. Um, but Trish, I don't know how long we wanted to spend on this call to action. I wasn't sure. I'm seeing a lot more coming through the chat.
Mhm. It's up to you.
Oh, it seems like things are kind of slowing down. And one thing that I noticed, Trish, there's somebody that said that clearly articulated values have helped our organization build and maintain staff. But here's the funny thing about that is that values also drive your structure, right? And
Mhm.
so to think about like our organization, like how it works and who reports to who and whether or not there's internal collaboration or not. How could how does what we do make it stronger or make it weaker, or other opportunities we haven't done before? I see another comment that's how many employees in our organization? I think is it Trish, are we at 95?
Yeah, we're in the 90s.
Yeah. Well, see, the flip side with a really big organization is that people can feel lost in the shuffle. And so making these opportunities available for people to be more present with each other and to feel seen and to talk about, their lives as a whole and not just, I'm a little worker bee. Nobody wants to be really just a worker bee. And Centers for Independent Living, this kind of organization really has the potential to help people build community, not just be a place to work. So,
I see they're talking. I also see that someone brought up burnout, which is something that we've been talking about a lot within our organization, and I've definitely been talking within independent living. When you look at direct services, that is something that is very important to keep as a point of discussion. And so that is a rolling agenda item within our independent living department meetings, and something that is a rolling agenda item even within the manager and supervisor meetings, to speak with staff on ways to prevent burnout, because it's really important and it's something that can actually happen regularly if it's not a finger to the pulse on that particular thing. So yes, very important.
It is very important. I agree. But one thing I want to point out about burnout and organization structure. So the thing about organization structure is that you're generally going to have frontline people and then whoever is the supervision folks, right? But I sometimes feel like managers really need to help with burnout by assisting employees in predicting when schedules are going to be too much, when they have to dedicate time for specific projects, etc. So, management can really help the people that they supervise with burnout by helping them figure out, am I going to have enough bandwidth to do 5 projects or 3 projects? When do I need to take some time off? So really being active with helping people manage their time is a really important part of burnout. But I agree, like you can't be so burned out that you are unkind to the people that are around you and you don't have as much to offer, as you otherwise would. So it is important. Okay. I'm just gonna switch, Trish, I guess, if it's okay, to the next slide. Okay.
Sure.
Next slide, please. Okay. So, on this slide, I just want to make a note for the ILRU folks that the title actually needs to be IL Philosophy and Organization Policy. So we're switching to the component of this presentation where we're talking about organizational policies. So we just talked about structure, who reports to who, how does the organization work, right? But policies, the set amount of policies that you have that your board has approved, etc., those can also be a reflection of independent living philosophy. So I'm going to walk through a few examples that we have. So one that hopefully everybody is pretty on board with is that reasonable accommodations are obviously not just civil rights requirement, but they are an important reflection of independent living philosophy, in that we hire lots of people with disabilities, and of course, reasonable accommodations are part of disability practice, right? And so for us, it's important to have a clear process with commitment to equitable access and problem solving. When I say problem solving, I'm going to emphasize problem solving, because one of the things that tends to demoralize people a lot is when they ask for a reasonable accommodation and somebody just goes, no. And, I think it's a lot better to try to partner with the person to problem solve options or ways to make it happen, etc. But it is really important to have a problem solving approach, not just a compliance approach. Okay. So that's important with policy. Another independent living philosophy reflection, honestly, is going to be in your organizational environment. And so to that extent, Access Living has policies about being a drug-free workplace, about being a smoke-free workplace, and about being a fragrance-free workplace. All of these have to do with disability access needs, right? So we want to make our organizational environment as accessible and inclusive as possible through policy. Okay. The next item there on the slide is about the work setting. And, uh, I realize that this is a complicated subject, but what Access Living has found to be probably the best reflection of independent living philosophy and how we do our work is to have a hybrid work policy. And what that means for us is that, in general, except for reasonable accommodation requests, in general, our staff work in person 2 days a week. And then the building is open 4 days a week, and they can choose which 2 days to come in. And then Fridays we're closed, so everybody gets a day of work from home. So we have that kind of hybrid arrangement. We also have hybrid video meeting setups in our building, so we can do hybrid meetings from within the building as well. And the reason I say that this is an important reflection of independent living philosophy is because this kind of work routine is what a lot of disabled people need. to be able to work. And so, to us, it just made sense as a disability-driven, access needs-driven workplace to have a hybrid environment. And it's provided also a lot of flexibility for things like let's face it, people are in the reality of being parents, providing care for others. And so this adds a little bit more flexibility to take care of our personal needs as well as do the work we need to do. And then the last policy that we're going to talk about a bit more is actually about wage and salary, going back into that. And I'll talk a little bit more in depth about that one. But Trish is going to take over and talk more in depth about the work policy because that is a very important example of a policy that reflects SILC. Next slide.
So we're just going to take a closer look at the Access Living hybrid work policy. One of the things that Access Living prides itself in is being able to get staff input throughout the organization. And that's anytime any major project does take effect within Access Living. And this was no different in coming through with the hybrid work policy and what that was going to look like. And so we were able to kind of discuss some of the misconceptions that go along with the hybrid plan and working remotely. I think prior to the pandemic, it wasn't as prevalent as we see within different organizations now. And so we wanted to speak to what are some of those misconceptions and how we're able to work through those misconceptions or come up with different policies to put in place to make sure that our staff are working efficiently even when we are remote. And one of the common misconceptions is decreased productivity, as well as difficulty in collaboration because everyone is remote. And so we were able to talk about what that looks like. I know Amber mentioned that it is 2 days in person, but also speaking to being able to be intentional in collaboration when we are in the office, being able to have meetings when we are in the office, having, special days when we do come together for department meetings, and being intentional throughout that process is really important in building a hybrid work policy. When you look at decreased productivity, there are ways in terms of implementation to make sure there's efficiency. I think before there was this notion of as long as you see someone in the seat, then you know that they're working, but we found that that's not always true. And so being able to keep in contact with your staff, being able to have conversations on how the workday is going, where we are in a process for a particular project, those are ways to make sure that productivity is actually taking place as opposed to seeing a physical person being in a seat as it relates to working. Based on the staff-wide discussions, as Amber mentioned, it did result in 2 days in person. But one of the other great benefits is that we have what's called 25 remote bank days per year. And so with those particular bank days, even with the 2 days in person, you can choose one of those bank days at any time. You would just let your manager or supervisor know you need to use one of those bank days. So let's say, for instance, this week, I was supposed to be in twice this week, but I can only come in once. I will use a bank day, and you're able to, it is a use it or lose it, but it doesn't go over to the next year, but you can use that throughout the year, the 25 days. And it just improves the reasonable accommodation process. And sometimes we involved with discussion in terms of speaking with your manager, submitting reasonable accommodation requests to HR, working with your manager in terms of coming up with best practices for the reasonable accommodation and what would be most helpful on an individual basis when we look at reasonable accommodations. What is most helpful on a case-by-case basis, not kind of giving this full umbrella look at reasonable accommodations. But I think we were talking about communication earlier, having these discussions with your staff, even initially in the hiring process, when you're onboarding and you're talking through, this is what this particular position will entail, but also having the conversation in terms of what will be beneficial in terms of reasonable accommodations for that particular staff member, and them feeling comfortable not only having the conversation with their manager or supervisor, but then also boarding with whatever is needed to our HR department. So I think it's important in terms of having that collaboration from the manager all the way to the HR department. And then clear communication in terms of implementation. I believe that's the next slide. I'm sorry. So clear communication in terms of implementation. We do check-ins once we implement the big change. We've done a couple of check-ins and also surveys in terms of seeing how the hybrid policy plan is going within our organization. Are there things that need to be tweaked? Are there things that aren't working? If there are things that aren't working, what are some things that we can do to change it? Is there, I mean, just to speak frankly, is there abuse in the policy? Are we seeing those who are saying they're actually working, but they're not working? And how can we better have these sometimes difficult conversations to make sure that we can keep with a program? Because what we find sometimes is we will take away an entire program when something may not be working, instead of having conversations to talk about what barriers exist and how we can have further engagement and productivity if we do see that there may be those barriers. But as I mentioned earlier too, I think it's really important to take advantage of those in-office days in terms of collaboration, in terms of engagement. I will say that there have been times where managers or supervisors would need to have staff come in that may even be outside of the date that they may have planned to come into the office. But having conversations early on to say, we will have this particular presenter or presentation on this day, and we would like for staff to come in on that day. And what I found, I don't know, Amber, if you would agree too, is that we really haven't had pushback because communication is very high in terms of letting people know ahead of time, in terms of making any arrangements. I know Amber spoke to, there are a lot of parents within our organization. And so trying to give them enough time to make the accommodations even at home so that they are able to come in on those particular days. Next slide, please.
This is Amber picking up. So, just know that we're going to have an opportunity for chat feedback about the hybrid works routine right after I finish talking also about wage and salary. So we'll have an opportunity to dig into your feedback about both of those things. But so Trish talked about the hybrid work policy that we have. The other policy we wanted to give you a closer look at is our wage and salary philosophy. And as Trish mentioned earlier, just to refresh everybody's memory, we have a committee that consists of people from across Access Living who work in different roles. Some of them are managers, some of them are frontline people. And they're the ones that get together and make key decisions about certain aspects of how we compensate people at Access Living. And let me think. So I'm just going to go ahead and talk about okay, so what they did was they got together and they wrote an actual philosophy document, which is something that we can show people who are interested in. But what they wanted to do right off the bat was just first be clear about what kind of workplace we're trying to aim for. And so what the wage and salary committee came up with was they said Access Living strives to be a leading mission-driven organization that is a sought-after place to work. We want to compensate staff fairly and competitively and provide a robust array of benefits to create an environment that encourages an appropriate work-life balance and respects employees' time and lives as whole people, and to build a diverse and equitable workplace. So that's what the committee came up with. Go to the next slide. They followed that by also saying, by making a statement about culture, the kind of culture we want to see, right? Access Living culture embraces integrity and accountability, respectful relationships, equity, and diversity, as we create a community that challenges ableism and promotes disability inclusion, as well as its intersection with all other identity groups. We believe the best way to achieve our mission is to attract, train, retain, and support a committed, talented, diverse team of employees. Next slide. And then they said, this access living written policy has been created to explicitly define the elements of our compensation structure in the interest of promoting transparency and equity. Okay, so the next slide. Okay, so what they did is Trish mentioned the example earlier of the bonuses, and so the Wage and Salary Committee does decide how we do our bonuses, right? Our finance, our CFO works with the Wage and Salary Committee to also talk about, the different like wage categories that we have at Access Living, et cetera. But one of the most important ways that we try to advance equity in, hiring people for Access Living is that we have some adjustments that we make to starting salaries that have to do with like lived experience and other items, right? So you should know that Access Living's wage and salary compensation system is not a merit-based system. And the reason for that is because merit-based systems can really open themselves to um, favoritism, subjective judgment about who gets paid more, and then what you have before you know it is a range of salaries that are not always appropriate to the people, and they don't feel fair and that sort of thing. So, but for starting salaries, there were some very specific suggestions that we wanted to make to you all. Is that we actually offer an increase and starting salary if somebody identifies as living with a disability. We offer like a $750 increase to the starting salary if you live with a disability. We also offer $500 if you are fluent in Spanish or American Sign Language, which are the two most often used non-English languages that we see at Access Living. So we offer extra money if you actually are fluent in Spanish or ASL. And then we also make some other adjustments related to experience and certifications. Or, for example, if you have a graduate certificate or a bachelor's degree, there's those. But we really wanted to make sure we were recognizing that people are bringing value as employees through their lived experience in terms of disability or speaking different languages or cultural competency. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is actually where I think, Trish, we have some poll questions for you all. And so we're going to talk about both the hybrid work schedule and wage and salary, but I'm going to turn it over to Trish for the first poll.
Awesome. This is Mary Kate. I am launching the first poll. I'm just going to share the screen and read the instructions. So on the screen, there is the poll and the first question, which is, does your organization offer a hybrid or remote work policy? You can participate in two ways. You can answer the poll with your web browser. So if you open your web browser and go to pollev.com/disability led, you will see the poll appear and select your response. You can also text your response to a 5-digit code 22333. In the body of the text, you can type the keyword disability led. You'll get a confirmation that you joined my session. And from there, you'll answer your response. A is yes and B is no. So based on our yesterday, we're going to just pause here, Trish, but if you want to describe what you're seeing on the screen in terms of response, and we'll give folks a few seconds.
This is Trish. So the current poll is, does your organization offer a hybrid or remote work policy? I'm really encouraged to see the amount of people that do have yes, which is really great. And also curious in terms of, for those that don't offer it, are there any particular barriers that you're seeing or just hesitancy in implementing it within your organization? I think, in this particular call to action, it would be really great to have this discussion too, and what that would look like in terms of implementation within your organization. Is it a technology thing? You know, we found that as well in terms of technology. Is it just developing a policy? Is it thinking through or looking for additional examples at other SILCs or organizations as to how to implement it? So very curious and looking forward to that discussion as well. Looks like it's not moving as much, so I think we've received a majority of the responses.
All right, I'm gonna switch to the next question. Okay, and folks can use the same link that they were just using. This is Mary Kay, give me one moment. And I will read the question. All right. Lots of buttons to get us there. One moment. All right. And the question is, has your SIL or SILC implemented an unbiased and equitable wage / salary structure within the organization? You can respond yes, or A is yes, B is no, and C is I don't know. We also have the chat open for folks as well to engage in the call to action. So.
This is Amber. I'm gonna jump in because I can see that the little poll things are moving on the screen. So it looks like, you know, we're hovering about like 45% for people who don't know. You know, and of the remainder, about 20% are saying that they know for sure that the SILC or the SIL hasn't implemented an unbiased and equitable wage and salary structure. 34% said no. This is a tricky one because figuring out how to answer it, you know, just if you are somebody who is not in management, it's possible that maybe your managers are working on this, but you just don't know it yet. I mean, there's that factor. If you don't know because nobody's really talked about it, that's also a possible reason why, you know, you might not know. But I just want to say that it really has taken years for Access Living to arrive at the process that we have right now. And it's not like we spun on a dime and one day we said, we're going to be equitable. You know, it actually took a lot of you know, looking through our records to understand over time how much were we paying people, how much were starting salaries for different kinds of positions, people that have been there a long time, were they making, you know, were they getting increases in a way that also reflected like their value to the organization or not? And, you know, we did find that there was some subjectivity in the practices. And so anyway, it was decided that group thinking from people with lived experience of different life experiences, you know, was going to be a better way to try to figure out what we should do. So, and then Trish came around and we had the, you know, the wage and salary discussion. But I don't know, Trish, if you want to say more, I'm just giving a little background on the long.
And this is Mary Kate, sorry, just want to say based on the poll, it looks like it stayed the same from when Amber described it, but we'll switch back to the slide if that's good. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks. And folks, the chat is open. Just select the drop down, respond to everyone so folks can see.
This is Trish too. I just wanted to acknowledge, I see in the Q&A, there's been some question in terms of just salary for, let's say, an attorney position. And it kind of goes back to what Amber was saying. There has been research that's done in setting those particular salaries so that it is within the industry standard when we're looking at hiring those that would be within our organization. So that's always the goal in making it equitable and bringing on additional staff for the different roles that we need within the organization. But I want to make sure, because I know this is kind of discussing this from a call to action as it relates to the wage and salary, as well as the hybrid remote program that we have here at Access Living. So I'm just looking at some of the questions. I want to make sure we can get to either questions or even comments as it relates to implementing the hybrid, either the hybrid plan or even the wage and salary. And Amber, if I'm missing anything, let me know.
And no, this is Amber. I just want to say I'm double checking the Q&A box. That my attention has been very much on the chat, but I see that let's see, there's a question about increases for language other than ASL or Spanish. Trish, I don't know if you can speak to that about other languages besides ASL and Spanish. What they did.
I don't believe there is additional outside of that.
Okay. Yeah, but I think that the way things work though at Access Living with this wage and salary committee, like one of the part of the point of having this kind of committee is that people who are not on committee know they can reach out to the folks who are to say, hey, can you bring up this issue and have it be reviewed? So that's part of it. So there's not so many gatekeepers on the whole discussion of wage and salary compensation. So if you said, hey, you know, I want to know if so-and-so speaks, if somebody speaks Chinese and they're fluent in Chinese, just as an example, can they get more money? I think, you know, there's definitely s- an opportunity to have that discussion with the committee and also to consider things on a case-by-case basis, you know, so I think it does, there is that. The second question was, how are you paying for attorneys to be on staff or paying more for certifications? I will say this about the attorneys, which is that, so we have done, but like, first of all, there are certain grant streams that we have that do help pay for legal services. But honestly, a lot of what pays for attorneys is also financial settlements from lawsuits, you know. And we also rely a lot on pro bono legal assistance as well. So I think the conversation about how do we pay for attorneys is kind of a big one. It's a deep one, and I would just advise reaching out if you want to have a big conversation about that. Um, let's see, and then yeah, go ahead, Trish.
I
Sorry.
just wanted to, I know there's a comment that I did want to address because I think it does come up a lot in terms of the work that we do and working with direct services. I know it says in human services that we have. And so speaking with and collaborating within our community is really important. One thing that I will say, which is definitely important at Access Living, that was something that did come up in developing the hybrid work plan. How are we able to still engage with our community if we will have some staff that are out, some staff working from home on a particular day, some staff that are in? I think intentionality and building that and continuing to keep with our meetings, our in-office meetings with our consumers. I will speak directly to our housing department. We have a lot of requests that come in for housing. And one of the things that we find is they use the remote days to do a lot of the administrative work. So a lot of the paperwork that's being done, a lot of the file work, all of that is being done on a lot of the times when they are working remotely. However, in office days are days that they are planning to meet with the consumers to talk over the different housing issues that may come up. Also, in terms of training that we have a technology program. So similarly, they're able to do a lot of the administrative part from home, the recruiting, the marketing. Those are things that can be done remotely. However, when it's time for the training classes, to be able to come in office, to be able to have office hours. I know that we have specific walk-in office hours, especially for our technology program. So I just say in terms of intentionality, if you can look at the different programs, whether within independent living, whether it's advocacy, being able to look at how to be able to keep that community feeling with the consumers, because ultimately, to the point that was made, that is the most important thing. But there are ways to also still implement the hybrid plan in doing that.
Yeah, yeah. And Trish, I'm also seeing a little bit in the chat box about, like for some people, work from home is great. For other people, work from home is a little bit challenging because you can't focus well enough. And here's the deal is that if we understand independent living philosophy as, giving people a chance to be, have self-determination and have dignity of risk, and you are presuming competence, all those values that I talked about during our first session, you know, uh, if people want to come in 4 days a week and work in person access living, they can. Or if you need to work fewer days, we have a conversation about that. So there's a lot of flexibility for that. I just think that if you have it paired with intentional time for the team to be together and feel like, they're, able to like get to know each other and have trust in one another, you want to pair it with those intentional times. Like that's kind of the secret of the success. And Trish speaks to the independent living department at Access Living. I know for my people, the organizers and the policy staff, they need time together to practice being disabled to be together. Do you know what I mean? Like when you have a group of folks with different disabilities in a room doing things, everybody learns a lot about each other. And so that helps build team togetherness, team morale, et cetera, et cetera. Um, oh, hey, Trish, do you want to say this thing about, see this Emily Bridges? Any comments if people have better internet and cell services? Do you want to say anything to that? That's a big one for you folks, I think.
Yeah, I was just reading that as you were saying it. Thanks, Amber. That is definitely something that we encountered with our staff in terms of just making sure there is internet access. We've had some that have had difficulty in terms of logging on from home, whether it's the particular area that they may live in. For some of those, we've offered hotspots if need be, but we've also just kind of had it. We've talked about the case by case basis in terms of implementing these things. And so being able to have a conversation to see, do you have access to the internet? We do provide the computers, of course, through Access Living. So that's not something that we have to kind of deal with on whether or not the person will be able to use a computer at home. I want to make sure I answer the full question. Have better internet and self-service in their work offices and choose to work there. Is it similar to, yeah. So I will say that the goal is for it to be similar. If you do have a hybrid plan, the goal is to still be able to give the same type of service that you would give whether you were in office or working remotely. And when we say working remotely, because some people have a very strict work from home, you must be at home in terms of working, whereas this means working remotely. We have some people that may have to go out of town and they're still working. And so the goal is, and we also talk with our staff, that the intentionality is that if you are, and we put the onus on our staff, you will still be able to have full access to do the work that is needed for your particular job. So even if you have to go to a different state and you'll be working, maybe using your remote days during that time, that you will have full access. And if there is some difficulty in doing that, having the conversation with your manager prior to whether you may need to take a day off. I've had some people that will say, hey, I'm not going to have internet for maybe 2 days. Does that mean you need to take a vacation day or a personal day so that we can keep with the policy that we have in terms of the expectation of still being able to work even remotely? I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think so. And Trish, there's some extra stuff here. Like the last few comments. See, there's one about whether we offer stipends to help cover the cost of internet. Like I know we don't help cover the cost of internet, but we do have laptops for people, and then there are certain like office supplies that we'll pay for.
Yes. And so I'll give an example. Some of our staff require lots of printing. And so if that is a staff member that will need a printer is provided. And so we have the conversations, even in terms of if you need a bigger monitor, we have accountants here that might need 2 to 3 screens. And so having these discussions to see what will be needed for your remote office to still be able to keep with the work as if you were in the office. Having those discussions is important. But to Amber's point, no, there isn't an additional stipend to cover the cost of internet.
Yeah. And how do you deal with the confidentiality issues? There's a comment in there about whether there's some documentation about remote work for like just confidence and confidentiality. I don't know if you want to say something about that.
We've talked about that in the past. I know that there have been times where I'll give an example. If we have someone that may be working from a public space, and so having the discussion that you shouldn't be bringing up information that may have a consumer's personal information, social security information, being cognizant of what you are pulling up when you are maybe in a public space working. The goal is not to actually be in a public space, but let's say, for instance, if for an hour you have to go to whatever location that you need to go to, and then will be somewhere where it is private information, being cognizant of what you are pulling up on your screen during those times. And so I think that putting the responsibility, as with any position, I look at it as any position in terms of hiring someone, you are putting their responsibility in their hands, that all of the onboarding that you're giving, all of the expectations that you're providing, whether it's remote or in person, it's still having that thought process that you've given them that responsibility to adhere to those particular things. So to answer the question in terms of privacy, yes, that is of utmost importance. And we have discussed that in terms of the information that you are pulling up when you are working remote and what that looks like.
Yeah. There's one last comment that I can speak to, and then maybe we can keep moving through the organizational cultural thing. But somebody put in the chat box, do you think it's important to have structure in a hybrid work structure? Okay, here's my answer for anybody who's wondering about that. An independent living philosophy, right? We know that it is important for people to be able to have a say on what works for them. So my question for anybody that has this is wondering about whether structure is important in hybrid work environments. My question would be, is it important to you? And you don't get to speak for everybody else. Is it important for you? And so, to be honest, like with my staff, and remember I have several. For some of them, having a lot of structure is very important, and for others, that structure is a good idea. And it has a lot to do with their disabilities. It has a lot to do with how they work best. I think the question, rather than thinking what's better, hybrid or in person, is this question of what sets up each individual staff person for success. How do we set up our staff for success? And how do we have enough options so that everybody can arrive at success together? And so that's what, I hope people will think about all of this. But let's talk about organizational culture. Trish. Yep.
Yeah, so the first tenet that's mentioned is disability representation in senior leadership. I will say at Access Living, about not probably over 90% of our senior leadership identify as a person with a disability, which is important in terms of even with our staff to be able to see representation within the senior leadership. As we talked about earlier, even in having discussions for reasonable accommodations, it's important to be able to see that this particular person has a disability in senior leadership, and even in terms of acquiring for additional leadership opportunities for our staff, to be able to see that it does happen, and there is success in being able to do that. Onboarding, training, and coaching, which is very important. One of the most important parts of bringing in new staff is the onboarding process and setting expectations early on, talking about the culture within the organization, talking about the importance of promoting independent living for our consumers, but also even for our staff. We found that some of our staff have taken some of the trainings that are available to our consumers. So it's really important to talk about why the significance of the independent living movement, because what we found is a lot of our staff may have come outside of that particular umbrella, but they are bringing their expertise, whether it may be in housing, whether it may be in technology, whether it may be in advocacy. And so that onboarding, excuse me, and training process is going to be really important in incorporating the independent living philosophy for those people that are coming in with that type of experience. And so that comes from having some of the trainings, even this particular training, like ILRU training, additional independent living, cultural training, and curriculum, making that available for staff as they are coming in and being onboarded to your organization. And then also using lived disability experience, authentic allyship to inform our work. So I will speak to myself, although I don't identify as a person with a disability, it's important that I do live by the mantra of nothing about us without us. And that means that I don't speak on behalf of staff that do have a disability. I allow them to speak on their own behalf. I allow them to speak about what that means to them in terms of the work that they do, in terms of the work that they do for our consumers, and to be able to allow that particular space. It's important that we acknowledge and respect the individual experiences and abilities, and that we foster a culture of allyship from those staffs that may not have a disability, so that our staff feel comfortable in terms of communicating openly, in terms of requesting reasonable accommodations. All of those things are very important. Next slide, please. The other part is the intentional recruitment of disabled people of color. One of the things that I do love about Access Living, I joke with Amber about this all the time. I say she is a human Rolodex, because she's a person that knows and keeps up with so many different people within the disability community, but it's so needed, because as we look at recruitment of our staff, as we look at continuing to grow within Access Living, it's important to use those particular resources. It's important to be able to engage with those within the disability community. So when we're looking to hire, we can talk to those particular people. We can kind of collaborate with other organizations. We can say, hey, we're hiring and we need additional staff to be able to come in and build from those type of connections. So the intentionality in being able to do that, as well as for disabled people of color. And so we've talked about whether we're going to HBCUs and recruiting, whether we're going to particular community colleges and recruiting within certain neighborhoods within the city of Chicago. All of that is equally important as we look to recruit to and retaining the talent within our organization. Using the interview process to make our people feel welcome to the disability community. I know one of the things that we talk about is speaking to the culture within the organization, even during the interview process. And that's whether or not we know whether that candidate will be someone that will be joining our organization, but we talk about this is what it looks like to work at Access Living. This is, and I really love when we do have candidates that ask, why do you work here? What do you enjoy in working for Access Living? Because that's a time to really speak to that culture and working for our consumers and being able to provide those different services. And so even asking during those particular interviews, are you a person that has any type of lived experience as it relates to a person with a disability? And a lot of times being able to engage from that end, getting an understanding of maybe if we do hire them, what that will look like in terms of maybe accommodations that will be needed, or just how they will be a benefit to our particular programs. I know one of the new programs that we have here at Access Living, it's been just a great, we brought in 3 new staff members, and to be able to talk about some of the things that they will bring, some of the great lived experience that they're able to bring in and cultivating this new program has been just such a great experience, and talking and collaborating with the other new staff that have come in and feeling comfortable in being able to do that. And then lastly, supporting one another in hands-on activities away from the office. I think Amber is one of those fun people who's always having something. She's always looking to have a mariachi band. I do know that, but in being able to talk about some of the hands-on things that we talk with our staff in terms of what will we be doing in the community, and what are some of the things that we will call to action in terms of bringing in those from the community where they feel welcome, where they feel like if we're having an event that we're inviting our consumers to come in and also participate, that we're going out into the community and participating with our consumers as well. Next slide, please.
This is Amber. This is just a quick look at some of the types of things that Access Living will do to grow staff cohesion, grow our disability community at our Center for Independent Living. So a few examples that we have certainly done with Access Living is visiting other centers for independent living. We certainly exist as a network, and understanding what our fellow Centers for Independent Living do, that's very important. But it also helps staff understand that they have counterparts at other organizations and they can work together and problem solve. And that does happen pretty frequently in Illinois. So visiting other SILs, great activity, just a day trip, no overnights. We have done some overnight trips, and not for conferences, but Access Living has done a couple of what I call road trips, where we have organized a group of staff to go visit multiple centers for independent living over the course of a few days. And people certainly learn a lot about each other on these overnight trips. They learn what's it like when we're all trying to get ready in the morning together? What's it like when we're trying to travel to one place and somebody's car breaks down, What's it like trying to make sure that where we stay at night is accessible for everyone? And so they're really good life learning experiences in a cross disability way. And then, there are other things that can be done to help build staff understanding and knowledge of the independent living life, okay? Which is, you can do picnics, you can do accessible picnics with each others. Take your staff to an accessible playground, let them loose. Set up community events where people can just really have some joy in what they do. And where your staff are not the ones having to work the event, but your staff are the ones that just get to play. Like that is also part of growing people, growing their resilience, but also really looking and learning about who we all are that work together. So I just want to say that about hands-on activities away from the office. And let's go to the next slide.
So this is another call to action, and I think based upon what we've talked about, curious to find out, just going over some of the last points that we went over, the disability representation with senior leadership. What does that look like within your SIL or SILC? Do you have a set onboarding or training for new staff that are coming in? What does it look like in terms of the allyship within your organization using the disability lived experiences, as well as recruitment of additional staff and disabled people of color? I know that Amber is speaking to even outside of our organization and away activities. Do you have that within your particular SIL or SILC? If you can drop your comments in the chat, please.
I can feel people typing, Trish. Hopefully we'll see some responses in a sec. Okay.
Oh,
And
so
yeah, I think there's an issue with the chat. Like everything that's coming through is coming to host and panelists only. So I don't know if the regular chat is working.
Yeah, so hey, hi everyone. You have to select everyone. There should be a little drop down, and then if you want your comment or question to go to everyone, you can do it that way.
Okay.
This is Trish. I did see a question that says, do you do home visits? Are they on days that are scheduled office days? Or are they scheduled for remote work days? So I can speak to that in terms of the home visits that we do have within the independent living department. And so they schedule it based upon the need for our consumers. And then outside of that, those days that they aren't going in a particular home, those will be their remote days. And so they kind of look at here's the schedule for visiting with consumers. They reach out to consumers, they set up the appointment times, and then outside of that, that's how they're able to look at what their remote days may be. So those days, I don't know if I may have mentioned this earlier, but those days may change week by week. It's no set day to say, you know, Monday and Tuesday are my in-office days. Those will change based upon the business need. And our employees are comfortable enough in terms of being able to change it.
Yep. This is Amber. Can I just say this? You know, somebody said continue to hold people accountable and folks partake in actions and behavior that don't involve or don't follow IL philosophy and principles. So I want to say that, you know, we none of us are perfect, okay? But really appreciate when people, rather than saying let's hold people accountable, let's invite people to learn something new. Let's invite them to have some support. Let's invite them to think differently. Okay. And the thing is we really do all need each other. And so I just want to urge people to try to, you know, work with folks through what's happening. And the other thing that I want to say is coming in a lot through like private message, public message, is that for those of you who are in management, your staff really want you to hear them out. This is really coming through that, you know, if there's just something like I think it sounds like some of the practices that Trish and I deal with at Access Living, these are something that your staff might want to do. And you know, there's a way to make things happen. And so if you're kind of nervous about making a change, but your staff are kind of insisting on it, and you're like, I don't know if this is gonna be good, then reach out. Let's support each other to figure it out.
I also see, I just wanted to give just a suggestion. I did see that sometimes there are barriers to activities outside of the office based on funding. And so I think Amber gave some really great options in terms of free options that would be available in terms of participation with your staff, or even Googling something like that as a manager. What are some cost effective activities that you're able to do with your team, and what does that look like? And having that discussion. So I think that there are sometimes ways in which to get that accomplished where it's not, you know, overly expensive in terms of being able to do it, but you're still able to engage with your team.
Mhm. Yeah. So, I mean, at the end of the day, independent living philosophy is about seeing people for who they really are and how they want to be, and looking at people's strengths, presuming competence, allowing dignity of risk, right? And really thinking about how society around us disables us. And that can sometimes apply to organizational policies and practices and structure and culture, you know. But there are ways to move past this because at the heart of it, you know, independent living is supposed to be about helping people be their best selves, right? And that should be your goal at work, helping everybody be your best self and being your best self, you know, setting everyone up for success. So I just want to say that as a sort of overall comment. Hmm. More chat box stuff.
This is Trish. I see a question in terms of, is it encouraged to have the board interact with the staff? I think that that's a really great professional development tool. One of the things that I know Amber and I have both done is some of our board meetings, we will incorporate some of the staff to attend, speak to some of the programs that are going on, answer any questions specific to a particular program. And it's a way for both our board to be able to see the staff, as well as staff feeling comfortable to speak about their programs. And as I said, I think it's a great professional development tool. Of course, you can't always have the entire staff attend, but being strategic in terms of when they are able to attend and speak with the board.
Mhm. Yep. Chris, there's one comment about, somebody was saying we need to, I think multiple people have said we need to spend more time teaching people about independent living philosophy. And let me just say this, people learn in a lot of different ways. For some folks, having a conversation or a webinar about it, that's good. But I just want to challenge people to put yourselves in positions where people have to work the independent living philosophy way together. Sometimes people learn by practice, hands-on. Let's do something together. How do we make it accessible together? How do we open up opportunities together? Okay, so independent living is not just like one lecture, it is definitely an everyday practice. And welcoming people who are newer to that practice into situations or activities where you can work together, that really is a growth opportunity. So I just want to encourage people to think about that.
Awesome. This is Mary Kate. I see there's a lot of more questions and comments. So Sharon, if you could advance to the next slide. We're gonna add all of these to our kind of parking lot and come back to them, or we'll have the opportunity to come back to them during the social hour. But I did just want to say thank you so much, Trish and Amber, and we're gonna transition into our break, but is there any other kind of final comments that you want to share? Or
Thank you. It's great to be here.
awesome.
Thanks for having us.
Awesome. All right. And then if you go next slide, so we're gonna be taking a break until 3:30 for session 4. In the meantime, when we have our break, if you have a minute to do our evaluation, we'd love to hear back from you and ways we can do more of these conversations. So with that, thank you so much, Amber and Trish, and we're gonna go on break.